Well, good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Recovery. I'm Ron Williams. I'm a certified addiction recovery coach. And we meet together here every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. And to discuss topics related to our recovery. And so, as you're coming in tonight, either to the live or this will be posted after we finish tonight, I would ask that you would, in the chat, post, check in, let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd like to get to know everybody a little bit better, find out who we're reaching and where we're reaching you at. I also want to let you know that coming up in October, once a month, I have a guest on Let's Talk Recovery. And coming up in October, I will have a guest here that will be here to talk to us. We'll be focusing more in October on sex addiction, unhealthy sexual behavior, and I'll have a guest here in October that will be talking with us about betrayal trauma, how my behavior as a man affects the woman that's in my life, and that's coming up in October. Looking forward to that evening. So tonight, again, I want to thank everybody that takes a look, that joins us, and tonight we're going to be talking about replacing old habits with new life-giving practices. And in my own life, my addiction, I've shared a little bit before, my addiction resulted in me being incarcerated for 2 years. And one of the things that I remember is I came in after being locked up for 2 years. I've been 2 years, no acting out, no relapse. And I came out of prison convinced that I was cured of my addiction. And it didn't take very long after I was released for me to figure out that I wasn't cured of anything. All that I had was 2 years with no access. And for me, that's when real recovery began. That's when I really had to go to work to get the help that I needed, to do the work that I needed. And that's when I began to understand that old habits have to be replaced. We can't just shut them down or run from them. Maybe you have heard statements like, to break a habit, you have to make a habit. Or maybe if you are involved in a 12-step group, something like that, maybe you've heard that term dry drunk. And the idea is that somebody removes something from their life, they don't replace it, and it either comes back worse than it was, or that void is filled with something else. And that's what we're going to be looking at today and what we're going to be talking about. So, why does replacing habits, why does that matter? What's so important about that? Well, addiction leaves a void. When we remove something from our life, it leaves a void or a vacuum. And if we don't fill that vacuum, if we don't fill that void with something positive, if we don't have something to replace that, our old behaviors eventually return. Or perhaps not the same exact behavior, but other unhealthy negative behaviors eventually fill that void and fill that vacuum. The principle is that we don't just stop something, we have to start something better. We can't just stop, we have to start something better. Have any of you experienced that in your life? I can say for myself, I spent years focused on my behavior, focused on the behavior associated with my addiction. Now, why was I focused on that? It's because that behavior is what was causing pain. It was causing pain for me. It was causing pain for people that I care about. And so I was focused on that behavior. There's a little phrase that I use when I'm working with clients, and you may have heard me say it on here before. I know that I have. But the idea is that behind every behavior is a feeling, and behind every feeling is a need. And the problem that most of us have to work through is that we become overwhelmed and consumed by that behavior, and we focus on that behavior. And because of that, we never look back to find out what the need is, what the cause is of that. And anyway, we have to work backwards, and we have to fill that hole, that missing spot. So what I want to talk about for a few minutes today, as we are getting started here, is the concept and the idea of the addiction loop. Maybe you've heard about this before, the addiction loop. And so in the addiction loop, we have three parts to that loop, or to that cycle. And in that addiction loop, it begins with a trigger or a cue. That trigger or that cue can be a number of things, and it can be internal or it can be external. And so examples of internal triggers or cues might be things like stress, like anxiety, loneliness, shame, or boredom. These are internal triggers, internal cues. And these are things that we experience. A lot of times, these internal cues are tied directly to our feelings. That's why my little phrase that I put out there a minute ago, behind every behavior is a feeling. Behind every feeling is a need. But a lot of times these internal triggers and cues are feelings. They're emotional triggers or feelings that trigger us and that trigger our behaviors. Have you ever experienced that? Have you taken the time to notice that? This is why it's really important that whenever we relapse, or whenever we just have that close call, we slip into that time where we are really drawn towards a relapse or towards acting out in some way, it's important for us to sit down and process what's taking place. I recommend that this be done through journaling. In journaling, we can look at things like, what was I feeling leading up to the relapse or up to that close call? What was I thinking about? What was I doing? Who was I interacting with? And what was I thinking about doing? There was actually a study several years ago in relation to alcohol, and I found personally through talking and communicating with a number of people, and even through my own experience as an addict, that there are generally specific days or times that we're drawn to act out. And so we process and we identify what it is that's triggering us and that's setting us off, that's causing us to begin to move in that direction. These triggers or cues can be external. They can be things like seeing people that we used to use with. There are times when interacting with people that we used to hang out with and we used to use with, that may start us back in that direction. That may be that external trigger or cue. It can be things like driving past a bar. I was talking with somebody today, and he's just been going through some change and things in his life. He's just moved into a new apartment, and that move has been a little bit stressful. And he pulled in to a gas station this past week, and everything was going fine. He was a little stressed because of the move, but he pulled into a gas station to fill up the truck. And as he climbed out of his truck, he looked up, and right there in that parking lot behind the gas station was a liquor store. And just seeing that liquor store combined, that's the external trigger, seeing that liquor store combined with the internal trigger of the stress and anxiety he was experiencing because of the move. Those two things combined, he went from being in a good headspace, a good state of mind, to immediately saying, oh, man, I need to stop in there when I get done. Now, he didn't do that, but that was his natural response. And he had to catch that and reel that in order to avoid a relapse. And so these triggers or cues, internal, external. Seeing somebody we used to use with, driving past a bar, it can be payday. For me, my relapse was my struggles were tied to payday and to the activities that I would do and where I went on the way home from work on payday. It can be certain times of the day. There are all kinds of external triggers that can be present. And so in that addiction loop, we identify we are set off by a trigger. The second part of that addiction loop is the behavior or the routine. It's what takes place. So, for instance, if my struggle is alcohol, I experience the trigger, internal, usually a feeling or an emotion, external, maybe seeing somebody or being in a certain location, something like that. And my next step is the behavior or the routine, how I normally respond to that. And so it moves from the trigger to using the substance or engaging in the addictive activity. So we have the trigger and the behavior. And then the third part, the last part of the addiction loop, is the reward. How does that reward work? What does that look like? Well, in the addiction loop, that reward is usually some form of short-term relief. We either numb the feelings through drugs or alcohol, or if the addiction is behavioral, perhaps sex addiction or something of that type, well, we experience short-term relief. We experience the pleasure that's present. We experience the numbing of the feelings or the triggers that are there. It numbs our anxiety. It may reduce the loneliness. Takes away temporarily the shame or the boredom. It numbs the pain. We feel relaxed. It's a way for us to escape, or a way for us to move towards feeling normal. Can you relate to that? Can you relate to this addiction loop and what I'm talking about here? We're triggered, internal or external triggers or cues. We turn to the behavior and we experience the reward. The problem with the reward is that it's generally very short term. And the longer we're in our addiction, the shorter that period of time that reward lasts. The addiction loop. And that's an important thing for us to understand. That loop, that process will always be present in our behavior and in our relapse and acting out. A lot of times I talk with people and I'll ask them, did you process your relapse? Did you process your struggle? And they'll hem-haw around with that. And I'll ask them, okay, what were you feeling leading up to the relapse? What were the feelings that were present? What happened? What was the trigger? And I'll get responses like, well, it wasn't anything. Life was great. Everything was perfect. Everything was fine. And then it just happened. And what I'm going to ask you to consider is that it didn't just happen. It never just happens. There's always a process. There's always a loop. I'm here in Southern Indiana, and I don't lay down at night and close my eyes and wake up the next morning in the stadium at a Colts football game in Indianapolis. It just doesn't work like that. There's a process. If I'm going to arrive there, there's a process that I have to walk through in order to arrive at that destination. And it's the same thing in our addiction. There is always a process. There is always a pattern of some kind. So, the addiction loop. Now, let's talk for a few minutes about the recovery loop. There also, if there's a pattern to our addiction, there needs to be a pattern to our recovery. If you know me, if you listened to me before, you know that I believe in having a plan. And that plan just documents that pattern that we're going to follow and that we're going to put into place. So in the recovery loop, here's how that works. The recovery loop begins in the same way as our addiction loop. It begins with a trigger. It begins with a cue. And most of the time, almost always, that trigger, those cues, are exactly the same as the triggers and cues in our addiction loop. It begins with a trigger that'll show up like stress, like loneliness, like shame, like reminders of old patterns and old habits. We experience the trigger, we experience the cue. And so that kicks in, but then here's where the recovery loop differs from the addiction loop. The recovery loop, we have a plan in place and we are choosing to take action. We're taking that unhealthy behavior, that unhealthy habit, that old habit, and we are choosing to replace that old habit with a new habit. And until we begin to replace those old habits, like I said earlier, all we do is create a vacuum. So that new habit has to be developed. So what does that second step, the recovery loop, we have the same titles for the steps, 3 steps, the trigger, the behavior, and the reward. but the items and the steps in each of those things are different. The first one is the same. Trigger or the cue is stress, loneliness, old patterns, old locations, people that we used to use with. The behavior, though, in the recovery loop takes a change. So instead of using, we replace that behavior, we replace that old habit with a healthy habit, with a new life-giving practice, a healthy coping tool. Now, what does that look like? And what kind of things am I talking about there? Well, that behavior, we experience that trigger, we experience that cue, and instead of moving into the behavior, using the substance, resorting to the behavior and the actions that have played a role in our addiction, we move to a healthy coping tool. And there are a number of things that we can build in as habits. It can be something as simple as calling a sponsor or calling a friend. In a lot of groups, they talk about that 500-pound telephone. And my experience is that telephone can be extremely difficult to pick up. It's hard in the beginning to develop a new habit. New habits just don't come naturally. They take practice. They take repetition. For instance, with calling a sponsor, let me make a recommendation here. In my recovery, people always told me, call me when you're struggling, when you're feeling triggered, call me. And I would say, okay, and then I'd never do it. And what I have found, what I have come to know is that if I wait until I'm in the battle to make that phone call, I'm always going to fall short and I'm always going to fail. Those phone calls and that reaching out to other people has to begin in those times when we're good. So I have a sponsor, I have a group that I'm a part of, I have people that I interact with, but I don't wait and reach out to them only when I begin to struggle. It's like the guy that walks up to the edge of a cliff and he wants to see over the cliff and he leans out as far as he can and he waits until he loses his balance and has already started to fall over the edge before he cries out for help. It's too late. We're already in the process of falling. So I begin by building this new healthy habit of calling a sponsor or a friend by calling them regularly, multiple times a week, just to do a check-in. Even when things are great, I call them to tell them, hey man, today's been a great day and here's why. And I build that relationship. I get used to making that phone call in the good times. And then when that trigger kicks in, that habit is already present. It's already there. And it's easier for me to pick up that phone when I am struggling and to make that phone call. It won't happen if I don't build that habit prior to the struggle. Another healthy coping tool that we can use to replace the behavior is prayer or meditation. Prayer meditation, the meditation helps to calm us. It helps to soothe us. It helps to recenter us. Meditation, and there are a lot of good apps that are out there today for meditation. Some of you may use some meditation apps. And if you do, I'd appreciate it if you'd stick those in the comments here. I have some apps that I use, but I am always looking for new apps and new tools to share with other people. So if you use a meditation app, stick that in the comments here and let us know what it is. But a meditation app or a breathing app, I used to think that things like breathing apps was just new age garbage. But a nurse, actually, I was a truck driver for a number of years and I'm diabetic. And I had to go in regularly and pass a physical to be able to keep my CDL license. And if I didn't pass that physical, then they could pull my license and I'd be out of work. And I used to have what they call white coat syndrome. And a nurse one day shared with me, she said, because I told her I was in panic mode, you're going to take my blood pressure and it's going to be through the roof and you're going to take my license. And she told me, she said, just calm down. Here's what we're going to do. She said, I'm going to dim the lights, turn on some music, and and you are going to breathe. She said, you're going to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, long, deep breaths. And she said, I'm going to come back in a few minutes and I'm going to recheck your blood pressure. And she did that. And my blood pressure was normal. Breathing apps can be very beneficial. Abide is a good app. I've never used Abide Blast, but I've heard a lot of people talk about it. And I've heard it's a very good meditation app. I use some meditation apps like Lectio 365 is one of them that I use. And so there are a number of apps. Some are paid, some are free. A breathing app that I use is an app called Breathe, the number 2, Relax. Breathe to Relax. It's a free app. I'd encourage you to check it out if you're not practicing breathing. Prayer helps to recenter us. Prayer puts us in communion with God or with our higher power. Prayer lets us understand and realize that we're not in this alone. We have a power greater than ourselves that's here to help us in our struggle and in our battle. Going to a meeting is an important thing. Being a part of a meeting. I have been in group meetings. I went to my first group meeting at the request of my parole officer. I say request, it wasn't a request, it was an order. My first group meeting that I ever attended for my addiction was after I got released from prison, and parole told me I had to go to a group meeting or it was a violation. But I began and I met people and I found community, people that were struggling, had struggled in the same way that I had, who were able to share with me what had been beneficial to them. I was able to have a safe place where I could open up and be honest, no fear of judgment, no fear of shame. And that group involvement has become really a lifelong commitment for me. In the early years, I attended group out of a fear that I'd relapse if I didn't. But for years now, I attend group not because of a fear of relapse, but because group is where I have found family. Group is where I found a place where I can be open and honest. I'm not going to be shamed. I'm not going to be judged. You've been commenting here, Blast. I know groups have become a big thing for you. You weren't really excited about groups for a long time when we first met. And groups have become a regular part of your life. And I think they've contributed a lot to the growth that you've seen in your recovery. So going to a meeting. Things that we can fill in would be things like exercise. For most of my recovery, walking has been an important part of my recovery. Get out and walk. It helps me to process things, helps me to relax. Just recently, just a few weeks ago, a friend of mine who has just begun running, he did a 5K with me. We went out together and it was his first 5K. And it was a 5K called Back the Blue, supporting the local police departments and the police union. I believe all the funds went to programs they do with kids and that kind of thing in the neighborhood. And My friend and I participated in this 5K together. It was his first time. And I got to tell you, he ran off and left me in the dust. I was there to walk, and he was there to run. And he ran. He did a really good job. He finished well. And he has shared with me since that time, that was his first 5K, and just participating in that. In that environment, I think there were over 2,000 people involved in this 5K. And his participation of being in that crowd and in that group as he was running, he felt a sense of community and a sense of belonging. And that was a benefit that he experienced in that 5K. But exercise, going to the gym, working out, this is an important tool that we can use to fill that void that's left as we're stepping away from our addiction. Journaling is an important thing for me. Journaling is where I'm able to process any struggles. Journaling over the years has actually, because I use a 4-question check-in in my journal. Those 4 questions, I mentioned them a minute ago. What have I been feeling today? What have I been thinking about today? What's been on my mind? What have I been doing? That includes where I've been, who I've been around, and what am I thinking about doing. I use a 4-question check-in in my journaling. And what that has done for me is that actually, as I have looked back over time through my journals, journaling with a format like that has actually allowed me to recognize patterns in my addiction and in my struggle, and has helped me to plan and put tools and things in place. Listening to music. I listen to music a lot. Sometimes I'll get out and drive, put on some music. In the summer, I've got my windows down and I'm driving back roads and listening to music. Or I can be in my room listening to music. Just last night, I was in a group and we were talking about self-care. And one of my friends in the group was sharing. He plays the guitar, and he said this. I'm not saying anything that he didn't say first, but he said, he said, I'm really not really good at the guitar, but just sitting down and picking it up and beginning to play really helps to calm me and to soothe me. So playing music, listening to music. And then again, that third step of our loop is reward. There's that reward that we're looking for in the addiction cycle, which would be short-term relief, numbing the pain, feeling relaxed, or trying to feel numb there. There's a long-term cost to the addiction. Guilt, shame, health problems, broken relationships. Well, there's a reward also in the recovery loop. And the reward in the recovery loop is relief. It's connection. One of the most common factors in addiction is isolation, is to shut ourselves off emotionally and shut ourselves off to other people, to our feelings. The reward in the recovery loop is relief, and it's connection without the destructive side effects that we listed as we talked about the addiction loop. And then long term in recovery, as we replace these old habits with new life-giving habits, the longer lasting rewards are lasting peace, growing confidence, and a sense of accomplishment. Now, what we have to do is we have to be careful not to have unrealistic expectations. An old 12-step saying is expectation is premeditated resentment. And man, I've found that to be true in my life. And so I have to be careful not to have unrealistic expectations. And as we're entering into recovery, as we're getting adjusted to understanding and living in the recovery loop, there are still going to be times when we struggle, and there may be times when a relapse takes place. Relapse is common for some people. Really, I would say for many people early on in recovery. And what we have to do is we have to be careful not to stress out and become too concerned with the relapse. What we're looking for is that idea of progress and not perfection. I was meeting with somebody regularly, and when I first met him a couple of years ago, he relapse was he was living in a state of relapse. He was acting out in his addiction multiple times every week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week. And we were talking recently. He and I had gone off and spent the day together, went to a massive flea market and walked around and hung out and spent time together. And on the way back, we were talking, and he and I have talked many times about that idea of progress and about that idea that he still experiences an occasional relapse. But today, there are months between relapse, where when we first met, relapse was a regular event multiple times a week. And so having realistic expectations, not beating ourselves up when we don't see perfection, when we don't see the growth that we want or that we expect. Change is a process, and change takes time. So, a couple of insights here. Very few people erase a habit loop. Very few people erase that addiction loop. We don't erase it. We retrain it by swapping in new behaviors that give a reward that our brain values. We replace the old habits and the old behaviors with new behaviors that our brain values, with new behaviors that are important to us. Over time, the new loop gets stronger and stronger and overcomes the old loop. And we eventually find ourselves living in that recovery loop and in that state of recovery. And again, recovery is a process. What we're looking for is we're looking for progress, not perfection. So, how do we identify the old habits that are present? Well, a lot of those old habits that are in that addiction loop may be habits like isolation. Maybe we physically isolate. Maybe we have told ourselves, I just don't like people. I don't want to be around anybody. I don't want to interact with people. But the fact of the matter is, we are designed, our brain is designed for community. And so it may be isolation. In my case, I didn't physically isolate from people. I was surrounded by people all the time. People that knew me in my active addiction would never have said that I was isolated, but I was living in isolation. Sorry. I was shut down emotionally. I was disconnected emotionally, and emotionally, I kept people at arm's length. People would talk to me. People said I was a great listener. I just never talked back. I never opened up to anybody about anything that was going on inside of me. So those old habits might be isolation. It might be unhealthy ways of coping. It might be destructive thought patterns where we're constantly speaking down to ourselves. We're living in a state of self-criticism and self-rejection. We need to learn to speak to ourselves as somebody we love and somebody we care about. And so these are just a few examples: isolation, destructive thought patterns, and then the addictive behavior itself. I want you to think for a minute about your own old habits. What are some of the old habits that you can identify? The most persistent old habits that you can identify that are connected to your addiction and to your unhealthy behavior. Have you taken time before to think about those things and to try to identify what those things are? It's important that we do that. If you'd like and you feel comfortable, stick a couple of those in the chat. What has been a common, persistent old habit that's been destructive for you? Mine was that isolation. Mine was included a lot of things like not practicing self-care, not getting enough sleep, all kinds of habits that were involved in my addiction loop. What is one old habit that you've had to face in recovery? Something that you've recognized. Yeah, I see that, Jade. Isolation. It was like I was saying a minute ago. That was my big one, isolating. And not necessarily isolating from people, but isolating emotionally. Just shutting down emotionally, not being willing or able to open up to anybody about my struggles and what I was going through. Yeah, that's real. That's real. So healthy replacements, we've talked about some of those already. To break a habit, we have to make a habit. When we try to remove a behavior, it creates a vacuum, it creates a hole. And if we don't replace that behavior, then that vacuum will eventually suck other unhealthy behaviors, maybe that old behavior, right back into it again. Yeah, I'm coming up on, right now, I am 9.5 years, 9.5 years sobriety. I've been in recovery for about 15 years, but I am 9.5 years sober. And there are still times when I want to isolate. There's still, let's be honest, sometimes people just aren't fun to be around. But we are designed for community, and we have to have that safe place. We don't have to have a large community. We don't have to have a massive group that we open up about everything to. Not everybody deserves to hear and know my story. But I have to be in a relationship where somebody does. I have to have a relationship where I am able to be open, honest, vulnerable, where I'm able to share those things that are so deep and so vulnerable that they could actually be used against me. I have to have a relationship like that if I want to maintain my sobriety, if I want to live a solid, healthy life. And so we talked about with healthy replacements, things like physical exercise, walking, stretching, these kind of things. Spiritual replacements could be prayer, meditation, reading. I know people have books that they read, maybe from the big book or the 12 and 12 from the Bible. Yeah, I see what I hear what you're saying. I have that community in a Monday night group of people that I get together with every week. And I've shared before the joke in the group when I do my check-in. I'm Ron. This is what I do on Mondays. And if I live to be 100, one of you young punks will be pushing me into this room in a wheelchair. And it's kind of a joke. And the guys make fun about which one in the group is the youngest and who it is that's going to be stuck pushing my wheelchair when I'm 100. And yeah, that community. That is, I would have to say that community and these guys that are in that group with me on Monday, we don't meet just on Monday. I spend time every week hanging out in coffee shops. That's what some of us old guys do, hang out in coffee shops. And I'll post on my social media, hey, I'm at the coffee shop. Everybody knows where that's at, everybody that's here local. And I'll post, hey, I'm at the coffee shop and I'm going to be here for a few hours if somebody wants to come by. And man, people show up. People from my Monday group, people from the church that I attend. And man, I have that community and that fellowship. It began with a meeting, but it has spread into a brotherhood and what I call family. It's my family. In wrapping up, I'm going to start to wrap up here. How do we make new habits stick? That's what's important, is developing habits to replace those old habits. We have to replace those habits, those behaviors that were in our addiction cycle. In our recovery cycle, we have to replace those old habits. And so how do we make those things stick? Well, first of all, we have to start small. And we have to stay consistent. One of the problems that I've really struggled with, I see that blast, man, you're going to have to move up here. You're down there in Florida, dude, and you're going to have to move up here if you're planning on pushing my wheelchair. And I'd like to have you up here, man. You got to come up here and visit first. Well, one of the things that I've really struggled with in developing and making new habits stick is I always try to start too big. And I have to remind myself, start small and stay consistent. I like to set big goals. I'm going to go to a meeting every day. I'm going to do this every day. And you know what? There are very few things that I do every day other than eat and go to bed. Those are maybe the only two things that I do consistently 7 days a week. And so I make commitments that are too big. I make commitments that are unrealistic. Start small and stay consistent. I start by committing myself to attend that meeting every week. I start by with a commitment of I am going to check in with somebody personally, I check in with somebody every day. Sometimes that's a phone call. I got to tell you, though, something that I've found that's been really good for a check-in in my case is I use that Marco Polo app. And here's why I like that. I see that consistency, man. I think that's the big problem for all of us, Jade. That Marco Polo app, I like that for check-ins. I do not like texts. You know, when we send a text, if somebody says, "How are you doing, Ron?" and I shoot a text back and say, "Great," what does that mean? Well, it can mean that it's the best day I've ever had, but it can also mean great in a sarcastic way. Great, the whole world's falling apart. Life sucks. In a text, we don't know anything. The thing that I like about the Marco Polo app is that if you're not familiar with it, it's like a video text. I send a video. I give my message there. It sends it. And if, for instance, if I'm sending it to you, Blast, you've used Marco Polo. If you're working with a client, when I send that, you can wait until you're free from that client and you can check that video. And you can see my face when I'm checking in. And when you see my face, you know what I mean when I say great. You know if I mean it really is a good day, or if I mean great, like, you know, sarcastically, like the world's falling apart. And so I still make phone calls. I still connect with people during the week face to face. But that Marco Polo app for me, and it's a free app, there is a paid side to it if you want to listen to the check-ins faster or something like that. But it's a free app. And I can do that, and I do that with a group of people every day. I send a check-in. So we start small, we stay consistent. The second thing we can do to make these new habits stick is we can tie new habits to existing routines. For instance, if one of my new habits is going to be prayer or meditation, I may start that meditation by using a meditation app or reading from a devotional or from the big book or from the 12 and 12 while I'm eating breakfast. That's the way that I started my daily meditation time. It began in my recovery by tying it to breakfast because I wasn't going to miss breakfast. And if I tied that to while I was eating, I knew it was going to get done. And then over time, that meditation has become something separate from that. But we can begin by tying these habits to existing routines, to routines that are already present in our life. We can use accountability. I shared with my Monday night group 2 weeks ago that I've been struggling lately with self-care. For a very long time, I had my devices set so that they turned off, and they're still set. I use screen time. All my stuff is Apple, and I use screen time, and everything turns off at 9 o'clock every night, except for family. Family can text me or call me or anything like that, but for everybody else, they're blocked, and my apps are locked down. But the problem with screen time is I can just override that by tapping a button. And I shared a week ago Monday in my group that I've really been struggling with self-care. I have always shot for a minimum of 7 hours sleep a night. I've had people laugh and say, "Man, I'd kill to get 7 hours of sleep a night," but I'm an old guy and I need it. And so I shared that I was struggling with my self-care, with turning off the screen time and reading or playing games on my phone or my iPad, was staying up late and then not getting the sleep that I needed. And some of those guys, I didn't even ask them. We have built such a relationship in that group that I shared that on a Monday night, and Tuesday night, one of the guys from the group sent me a text. Hey, man, make sure you get to bed tonight. You need your rest. I'm worried about you. Somebody sent me a message again Wednesday. And I shared anyway, I could go on and on about that group. That group has become such an important part of my life. And so I'm accountable to that group. And they have the freedom to speak into my life and into my behavior. And last night, I was in bed on time, and I'm happy to say I'm shooting for 7 hours sleep. I got 7 hours and 4 minutes last night. So I met my goal. And, and I have to set realistic expectations. I'm not going to be back on track 100% overnight. But man, I'm moving in the right direction and I'm gaining ground. And there are people that are helping me to do that. And then the last one that I'll touch on here is I think it's important for us to celebrate progress. Don't focus on perfection. Celebrate progress. When you see yourself gaining ground, give yourself permission to celebrate. I just told you last night, I for years have shot for and consistently averaged over the course of a week a minimum of 7 hours sleep a night. And for the last couple months, I haven't been anywhere close. Last night, I got 7 hours and 4 minutes. I was at the coffee shop today. I celebrated that progress. I celebrated that accomplishment with a strawberry banana smoothie. Celebrate. I celebrate. It's important to me. It helps me to stay focused and it helps me to keep pushing forward. So, wrapping up, we're at the end of our time here. Some of the key points that, or the key point that I want to emphasize tonight is that habits have to be replaced, not just removed. We are experts by nature at developing bad habits, and those bad habits have to be replaced. If they're removed and not replaced, they create a vacuum. They create a hole, and they will be filled by something. And if we are not intentionally filling them, they'll be filled by something unhealthy. So habits must be replaced, not just removed. Now, I want to issue a challenge to you this week. I want you to pick one old habit to let go of this week. But I want you to make sure that you have chosen one new life-giving habit to start. Don't give up the old habit unless you have that new habit that you're ready to put into place. And I want you to know you can do this. I'm looking here, Jade, you've been interacting tonight. Blash, you've been interacting. I've met both of you before. And Blass and I have hung out at some retreats and conventions we've been to. I met you, Jade, when I was down there with Elizabeth when she was going through her chemo and that kind of thing. And we can do this. We are doing this. All of us that are here, and this will be posted on my Facebook page for the next 30 days. And it'll be on my YouTube page moving on indefinitely. These get reposted to my YouTube page. And so all three of us that are here in this live right now are experiencing progress. We're experiencing growth in our life, and we're going to continue to do so as long as we stay in healthy community and connection, as long as we continue to check in, to be open and honest, and we continue to press forward. We're all going to continue to grow. We're all going to continue to experience freedom. And so that's going to be it for this week. I'll be back here next Tuesday. I hope you come back. For those of you that are going to be watching this over the course of the month, I know I've been getting a lot more views than I expected on Facebook and on the other places where this video gets posted. And if you're watching this and it's not live, shoot a message in the comments. I'd like to know where you're checking in from. And I want you to think about what is one habit that I can replace this week. What is one habit that I can pick and replace with something healthy and move forward? All right. Thanks for being here. And hopefully I will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a great night.